This week in Censorship, October 18th, 2020. This week featured two big stories about censorship by social media. The big one was Facebook and Twitter censoring Rudy Giuliani, that's President Trump's lawyer, former mayor of New York, and a prosecuting attorney for many years who went after all sorts of fascinating people like the investment banking firm Drexel Burnham Lambert in the 80s, the New York Mafia, and a lot of other interesting targets. Giuliani claims to have a copy of a hard drive from Hunter Biden, that's Joe Biden's son's laptop, that he has a rather strange story about how he supposedly got this copy of this hard drive, which allegedly contains emails and pictures and other information that puts Hunter Biden and the Biden family in general in a pretty bad light. And you can actually go to Rudy Giuliani's YouTube channel, which appears to still be up, and he has a number of videos outlining his rather considerable allegations against the Biden family and Hunter Biden. However, the link to the article on it in the New York Post was banned by Twitter and by Facebook. This is clearly part of the ever-expanding and rather curious censorship of increasingly mainstream targets, it might be added. A lot of the censorship started out with kind of fringy, weird characters like Alex Jones, actual Nazis, extreme right-wing groups. It steadily expanded to cover mainstream politicians, medical doctors, and research scientists who disagree with the coronavirus response, who criticize the lockdown, who criticize the science behind the coronavirus. It's actually increasingly censorship of the mainstream, or at least a part of the mainstream, and not necessarily these fringy characters. It's certainly worrisome, and this story and the censorship has been the subject of all sorts of articles by all sorts of people, so you don't need me to tell you anything more. Simultaneously, or very close in time, there was a purge of, we might say, non-mainstream, for the most part, channels on YouTube. Rudy Giuliani's channel appears to still be up, curiously enough. These range across the political spectrum. Some of them don't fit very well within any particular political spectrum. I sometimes take a look at The Last American Vagabond and World Alternative Media. They don't really fit neatly into any category as far as I can tell. What they share in common is often that they just have a different point of view from what increasingly looks a lot like maybe the Democratic Party establishment's point of view. They seem to be allied with Google, with YouTube, with Twitter. Although, again, it's an interesting point that somehow Donald Trump has this huge Twitter account that must draw a lot of business to Twitter. So exactly what it means when Twitter censors Donald Trump. In some circles, being censored by somebody like Twitter gives you more credibility, not less. Just as, of course, this blatant censorship by Facebook and Twitter has attracted a lot of attention to Hunter Biden, to the Biden family's finances, and a number of issues which one would think the Democrats would not want to be the focus of attention in the last few weeks of the campaign. So one has to, at times, wonder exactly what's going on with this censorship and who is really working with whom. Now, many people who have alternative points of view are looking for other platforms than YouTube. And there are quite a number of them, other platforms than Twitter, other platforms than Facebook, and that is prudent. There are a lot of alternatives in the video world. There's several. Probably the best known is BitChute, but there's DTube, there's Library, lbry.tv, there is Brighteon, and there's actually quite a number of others. There's new ones being set up because of the censorship, which is creating a market opportunity. And I'm on a number of those video channels. I'm not going to do a big review of them, but I wanted to kind of discuss another sort of maybe censorship that goes on that's rather sophisticated, and it isn't exactly the kind of thing we think of as censorship where things are banned. We see a lot of sophisticated soft censorship techniques. These are methods that don't overtly ban things. They include obviously shadow banning, where search engines derate or completely fail to find various content, and that's clearly been going on for some time, and it's become more and more obvious. It's not exactly censorship in the sense of banning content, but it effectively bans it. There is perhaps another rather fascinating tactic, which is to create a ghetto for alternative points of view, including crazy points of view, including false points of view, including very unpopular groups like the Nazis or Ku Klux Klan or other kinds of things. So you create a kind of cesspool where you push the banned content, and that means, understand, the greatest goal of censorship is to censor content which is true, which is factually correct. That may mean that a product that you're being induced to buy doesn't work, is ineffective, is harmful, is out and out dangerous. If you put only factually true information in the cesspool, in the ghetto, in this confined area, it would become very obvious within a short period of time. You simply go to the banned content website or the banned content magazine, read it, and you get the real story. That's obviously a problem with censorship. In fact, what you want to do is combine censorship of the true information, the damaging information, with false information. In fact, information that's controversial. And that combination or guilt by association will discredit the information, even though it's actually true. That is an alternative tactic. And this is, for those who have never heard of it, the National Enquirer. It's a tabloid newspaper, very famous, very infamous for all kinds of flaky content, sex, all kinds of things. It's also at times played a significant role in politics and events despite this, and it has a fascinating history. There's considerable close connections between its original founder, Generoso Pope Jr., and Frank Costello, who was thought to be the head of organized crime in New York City, New Jersey area back in the 1950s and 60s. By some accounts, he's the model that Marlon Brando studied for Don Corleone in The Godfather. Frank Costello had a sort of a speech impediment, and he had a kind of funny way of talking. Marlon Brando makes Don Corleone much more impressive than Frank Costello actually was. So the thing about the tabloids and about the National Enquirer, and it, for example, played a big role in promoting UFO cases and UFO interest in the 1970s when I was a kid. They promote some completely bizarre things, and I don't necessarily mean UFOs alone, but all sorts of strange stuff. So getting covered, a topic getting covered in the National Enquirer can be a bad thing. If you wanted to discredit certain factually correct things, you might give them front page coverage in something like the National Enquirer, because that would actually stigmatize the story, because it's being covered by this crazy off the deep end tabloid. Now, the National Enquirer also covers, quote, real stories, and this is one which happened a couple of, very recently, last year, in which they put out all sorts of damaging information of Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon. Now consider, the National Enquirer is actually closely allied with President Trump, who seems to be on pretty bad terms with Jeff Bezos. And lo and behold, the National Enquirer puts out some very damaging information which may have contributed to or even caused Bezos' divorce from his wife, which would be damaging to his financial and other interests. And in fact, at one point, Bezos was putting out a story where his phone had supposedly been hacked. He'd supposedly shared it with, I think, the Crown Prince, but in any case, some muckety-muck from Saudi Arabia. And he accused them of hacking into his phone and that they were blackmailing him and all kinds of this stuff. And it's kind of subsided, but it's a very strange story, and it's one of these fascinating scandals where the National Enquirer pops up. My point in all of this is not to take these sorts of things, and there's a lot of weird tabloid stuff on BitChute and Library and many of these other alternatives to YouTube. But there may in fact be a strategy here to herd people with alternative points of view into not very credible platforms. Give them a small audience that in fact discredits them. It's a sophisticated tactic. And it's very probable from the history of the National Enquirer that it's not new, that it dates back at least to the 1940s and 50s when the National Enquirer was established by Generoso Pope Jr., who worked for the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency as a psychological warfare specialist for a couple of years, and then proceeded to acquire the National Enquirer and make it into what it was. Now, his father, Generoso Pope Sr., was a highly connected, politically connected figure and newspaper publisher as well, who was closely tied to the Democratic Party and to people like Frank Costello. So it's a fascinating story, and there's a lot about it in this book, The Godfather of the Tabloid by Jack Vitek. I want to conclude by saying that when we talk about censorship, especially in the modern world with its free press, maybe in quotes, very sophisticated, counterintuitive methods are probably in use to discredit truthful information that we want to hear, that we need to hear. And part of that involves combining it and connecting it in the public mind with nonsense, highly offensive content, sex, various topics that tend to discredit that truthful information by association, guilt by association. So people should be aware of these seeming alternative sites and take them not only with a grain of salt, but consider that they may not be a good place to go, or they may be being manipulated and even have been set up from the very beginning, very much as the National Enquirer may have been, to serve some kind of strange psychological warfare / censorship agenda. Our previous videos and articles on the contradictory numbers on the CDC website have repeatedly been censored by a range of social media services, such as LinkedIn here. This was a few weeks ago. This is the actual post that was censored. We've run into this with a number of different platforms. It's rather concerning, especially considering that these posts are pointing out contradictory data on the official CDC websites and documents. Apparently, it is a real threat to the society, democracy, human lives to point out obvious, gross discrepancies on government websites. You can bypass this censorship with our Censored Search website and service, which you can reach at censored-search.net or censored-search.com or censored-search.org. We may add additional names later, but those are the names right now. It's censored-search. Find the answers to your problems censored by advertisers and other powerful interests. It is free. We have a free version, which ranks the search results according to popularity. That is how many other websites link to the page, the search result. You can also pay and get more control and transparency into the algorithms. You can get access to more advanced artificial intelligence algorithms that look through the censored content and try to identify pages that are censored because they contain factual, true information, and separate those out from other ones which are not so useful. A popularity contest cannot always do that correctly, and popularity contests can be manipulated in various ways. Thus, check out censoredsearch.com, censored-search.net, censored-search.org. This concludes this video presentation. If you like this video, please click like. Please click subscribe and the notification bell if you would like to receive more content from us. You can avoid internet censorship by subscribing directly to our RSS news feed. Please consider sharing the link by email and on your website or blog, in addition to liking, upvoting, or sharing on increasingly censored, advertising beholden, big company social media. We have encountered such censorship. Mathematical software is developing algorithms and software to automate data analysis, reducing the risks of costly errors and increasing the predictive power of the results. You can support our work financially by subscribing on our Patreon page, https://www.patreon.com/mathsoft, or scanning the QR code in the lower right corner.